Alright, that one's because she can reach in there more dashing GB China and Gala Dubamba, Rang in the Juba said, Zao in the Medican, Don San Jimo Chagore, Don San Series. More dashing GB China, the Nigi, Ranging when you Juba, Zao in Meba Tomba Don Saji ready, not Tomba Ding Ane, and the good Don San Zan, Gala Rang when you Juba Meba, and the Gandis Yobarson. 电气显起来锻炼，越这个锻炼主对吧？现在，这个锻炼呢，告诉人教啊，那所教的，今天用过的是，今天现在去跟着起呢，第一点多，告诉工作比起工作点把当短那么点把晒的，点把你南下越把的晒，按看上地光就去不了。
Good morning. Last night. It was mentioned again how all phenomena without exception, they appear to consciousness as being truly existent, as being independent, but when one investigates to see if they do exist in the way that they appear, if they exist by way of their own essence, no such essence can be found. And one realizes that all phenomena without exception are empty of being established by way of their own essence. Here one realizes emptiness. As we heard last night, this is the realization of the ultimate truth. Moreover, because phenomena are empty of true existence, they can arise in dependence on causes and conditions. And therefore, phenomena exist as mere dependent arisings. And this here is the understanding of conventional truth. So last night then, we started to look at the presentation on the two truths.
yu tongpa yin tobe ki tobe sherab selede dawa se tongpa yin tobe dawa tarduk se nga zo dawa tarduk si gore chisa di dawa tongpa yin tobe dawa tarduk se di karere la na chisa di ki shewa de karere la na nga zo kowa la ki ki nyomong be gyu dawa tarduk di kar sen denzi marik ba de rwa chisa denzi marik ba di ko mewa seba la dawa tarduk di gomche mewa sen ma do se tu mewa sa chisa dine sa denzi marik ba se di nga zo 코와리 기기 규조 뉴칼레 동아기 규조 타르득데 되시 제가 다디 년보 된지 매바디 년보디 매바 수이 년보디 제가 동방이 또 다와 타르득세 디고 시고로 제 디네자다 다와 타르득시고 자된 아주 됐 아다 고카보다 됐 강아데 요르와다 아주 디 타르득시야 당 아주기 약쇼데 데가래 양아주 잠다 제바 지고로 롭션 지고로 와다
This text is composed in accordance with the supreme view, the view of the Prasangika Madhyamaka. The view of the Prasangika Madhyamaka is that all objects are empty of inherent existence or empty of true existence, empty of being established by way of their own characteristics or essence, and that this empty nature of all phenomena is realized, or that all phenomena are empty, is realized by a wisdom. The wisdom realizing emptiness, the wisdom realizing phenomena being empty of inherent existence. And this is a topic of supreme importance. It's a topic of supreme importance because the ignorance of self-grasping is the root cause that keeps all of us bound within the realms of suffering. It is because of this ignorance of true grasping that we keep ourselves chained without freedom in the suffering experiences of samsara. The supreme view is the view of the Prasangika. The ultimate cause, so ultimate, supreme or final, it's the same word. The ultimate cause, or the deepest cause perhaps, is the ignorance of self-grasping. Its ultimate antidote, or its supreme antidote, is the wisdom realizing emptiness. To understand this entire presentation is difficult. It takes repeated effort, likewise to integrate it so that it transforms our experience. This too is difficult and takes repeated effort, but it is of unparalleled importance.
Sangye namki chue tempa, demba nila yangda tens. Chitin kunzup tempa dan, dambi duengi tempa ovos.
Turning to the text at the top of page 8 is a quotation from Arya Nagarjuna. Dharma taught by the Buddhas is based completely upon the two truths, a truth of worldly convention and an ultimate truth.
그래서 내 여름 책에 가르송고도 세는 아주 최근에 지내야 안 딱신 집에 쓰나 랑고 뭐네 마주봐 동상아지 동반이 책을 동반이 뒤던던데 말이에요. 그래서 다대 강来모두 랑원에 마주봐 인상 강来마디어 받을 랑만에 마주봐 인상 한 현실을 되는 주바리. 그래서 되는 주바 이제 된진 저와 주의 돈에 나절이야 안티기 당 안지게 중화 파워 좋은 자와 진나소지 용고레스 지산디 군주 템바레스 지산 최간지나 템바 군주 템바도 된다데바 이요레스 뭐 최간지나 디테도 뭐 군주 템바지다 안 된다데바 이용고레스 지송으로와 지산디 콩디다 가요레스나 데 공부르기 가서 송바레스나 지산 사기에 남기 최템바 템바니라 야다데 지팅 군주 템바다 템비등이 템바오 세드마 콩도 롱송거래 땡진 저와 중화로와 땡진 저와 전 현실을 되네 아니 좋은게 자와다 현실을 되네 아니 지금 귤에 되보기야다 현실을 되네 두시네 용고래 나서 용고래 해서 군주 템바 두시에 해서 송로와 지나다
His Holiness has quoted Nagarjuna here in order to show the source for what he has already been presenting, which is that all phenomena appear to consciousness as being independent, truly existent. But when one investigates, no independent nature can be found, no essence or self-existence can be found. Rather, phenomena are found to be empty of being established by way of their own entity, and this is the ultimate truth. So whilst phenomena appear to be independent, they are not. Rather, they are dependent on causes, imputation, parts, and so forth. And this is why they can function and we can experience happiness and suffering. And this is the conventional truth. The ultimate truth is realized when one realizes that phenomena are not independent despite appearing so. Conventional truth is realized when one realizes that they are actually dependent. And these two entities of the ultimate truth and the conventional truth, all phenomena have these two entities.
상기기 상기 주민들이 최기 남장 한 빠도 매바 송요레스 변형한 저기 단 최 빠도 매바 송요레스 감당 매바 다 튕비든 최 빠도 최까지 송바이네야 데메니 하나 군주 딘비 거라 군주 딘비 거 송어 디 거스 하나 전나 딘비 거 송. 제가 데바니레 딘지 디 거 송바마도 딘이 많이 디 거 많이 봐 최스 간하죠 말에 송야지 죄자 다간제 상지 송예기 최 간데스나 디 송예기 송기 죄자디 야나 되는 데 바다 아니 군주 데 바디 거래 송거래제래
Dharma taught by the Buddhas is based completely upon the two truths. Buddha Shakyamuni taught a wide array of sutras, and all of them are in accordance with either or both of the two truths. All of them, without exception, are in accordance with the two truths.
지딩 군습 덴바다 담배 든지 덴바오 세데 덴바니데 가레 랍다 덴바니 레티는 소와이나 덴바니데 가레 랍나 지딩 군습 덴바다 세데 아 저기 지딩 방아 저기 아 저기 답변은 아 저기 조파 조와다 자와다 레가자 지기 종 자에 자와제야 하는 아 저기 지 레가자 되니게다 망보지 디수차사 군습 덴바세 그래서 군습 덴바라 그래서 다 최근에 신네 다 담배 등이 담는 담바서데 담배가 된게 담바서 담바서데 가르 아니 니엘디세 지디용 군주 담바서 지디엔 군주세 담바서 지디엔세야디 돈님마도 별로 아니 지디엔 별로 세데 돈님마도 별로라고 돈님마도 별로 군주비 셰비기 유리야 아니 나소 유바디 세메 주득이 세메 유도 유리게 최근에 신네 데 군주 담바레세 예세 군주 담바서 데라 군주 담바 지딘 군주 템바 지딘 세야디 돈님마도 베셔봐 돈님마도 베 가사 돈님마도 베 셰베기 다 유진이 된 거래 다 군주 템바 디 체면 줍드게 디 유리 체면 줍드게 유 최간의 신변에 될 군주 템바라게 해지래다 군주 템바 된수치는 체나 말에 지딘 군주 템바시 지딘 세야디 돈님마도 별로 탄입에 참아제 지난 뒤 탄입에 체면 유리 가르도고 그러서는 디도의 유간의 지나 차상 군주된 말 해서 근데 디도의 유를 본바다 메다바다 되네 다말 여러 번 뭐고 강바스 지난 뒤 직된 바세에 돈님마도 로로고 돈님마도 로다 돈님마도 강사들 디 유전 책으로 와 다디 공기 하고에게 또에게 체면 주에게 유 간의 쉬어베나 되네 유디길래 아니 군주된 말하게 해서 군주된 말 해서
The third line, a truth of worldly convention. The meaning then of worldly convention, so firstly the term worldly means ordinary, so those who have not realized emptiness. So people or persons who have not realized emptiness are considered worldly. And all the objects of consciousness, those objects are illustrations of conventional truth. What makes it worldly is that this refers to the person who has not realized emptiness. And the objects of their consciousness, whatever those objects are conventional truths. Ultimate truth refers to emptiness. Everything other than emptiness is a conventional truth.
아다 직딩 군주 템바다서 직딩 세데 돈님마도베 로체 탄입에 체마제 돈님마도베 강사다 탄입에 체마제 유제네제 니 돈에 또에게 유디에 체마 차상 군주 템바레시제 다 담비 된게 템바오세 담바세디 돈용 오숨도베 캠파라고 돈용 오숨도베 캠파 돈용 오숨도베 캠파 디기 가르도고세네 동방용 오숨도베 캠파도 유 또에 유 동방이디 다 담바세디 또 롱아지게 르나네다 셰바네 돈용어스비 캠바디다 캠바 약쇼데제 담바이 마초와 그 담바라이도 다 랑아지게 군주별로다 돈이 또 돈지스비 또 요로디게 추시 작으로와 돈이 또 추시 작으로 돈용어스비 캠바디다 유전 코로 마초 원숨제 지상 유동바 담바지 돈용어스비 캠바디 담바디디래 다 디기 가르도고세 코로나 또의 유디 최 탐제 강라이마 랑문에 주변 동상한테 도고로 동상에 도고로 제가 돈용어선도 유디에 랑신이 주변 동비에 동상한테 대래 민가라서 돈단데 발라기래 해지래 진짜 담배 된게 댐바오 세대 진짜 담바 진짜데 진짜 군주 댐바는 돈단데 발세 군주 댐바라도 디나 유제 요를 땡아서 가르쳐 버리지 대시 직된바세의 유전을 고고래제 유전 돈이마도 별로다 돈이마도 강사의 유전이제 직된세 군주데 그런 군주 덴바데 라와다 그런 군주 덴베기 시고마 가르스는 돈이마도 비기 유전다 돈이마도 군주베 탄입에 체마다 강사디기 직된세의 컨트롤 고고래제 다 컨트롤이 가르도고래 또 유디 That you Dhamma Kansa, you're a shit, Demetis, you're a shepherd, Tamado, just a control to you, the Garto Gorson, don't you do go, Marwada, don't you let him be cheated, Chadoro, just a deep control to you, the Chazan Kuzutim. Dada, Dambi doing it, Dembo was a Damba said, that don't you want to be Champa this year, Damba this year. The Garto Gorson, Chetam, Ranshin tribute, don't buy the door, don't such doors, don't buy doors. Chizan, Korong. Damba de Tonyon so we can't but the chair, Koyong on the toy you de Tomba, detail, don't let them like this, Dembas, don't let them like this.
The conventional truths are pervaded by being mistaken. There will be varying degrees of error, but they are pervaded by having an error. Ultimate truth, on the other hand, these are unmistaken. They are therefore supreme. The word then that is supreme or ultimate. They are ultimate in the sense of being supreme, in that they are unmistaken. Moreover, so this word ultimate or supreme is similar to what Genla was saying in an earlier segment when he was talking about the supreme view of the Prasangika, the supreme realization, which is the wisdom realizing emptiness. It's that same term being linked here. And if I remember correctly, he also related it to the root cause, that is the supreme cause, the final cause. Because final or supreme or ultimate are synonymous here, or the same Tibetan word rather. So the primary difference here is that conventional truths are everything other than emptiness, and they are pervaded by an error. Emptiness, which is the ultimate truth, is unmistaken. Or this.
Dembani Latin Sungore, City, and the Kudu Dembalatin Sunguran, the Nadembalatin Sungore, Tin City, Sanyu Sunyagi, Jejetila, and the Kunzu Dembeki Jeja, and the Donademba Jetingores, Dembani Latin Sungore Cherva. And Dembani de Carre, Kanachi Lagirelana, Chezada, the Eugene Yungone, Caso Chitin, City, Chitin said Tony Matube law, no Kunzu Petani Betsamada, Tony Matube Kansa, Chitin said, that Konzu, how Koyagi, Konzu, you Toyagi. And this year, and Damba said, don't you want to be Champa de Cha, Damba said Corange. That dig doing city, Corong Toyag Uti, that don't let them by the essence. Chesada, don't let them by the Kunzu Demba Yawa, the Cavara Cheche, and the Dustin and Sungorwa.
The meaning of the verse then is that every teaching that the Buddha gave was either about conventional truths and or ultimate truths. If the teaching was solely about emptiness, it would have been a teaching on the ultimate truth. If the teaching was on anything other than emptiness, it would have been a teaching on the conventional truth. Hence, Dharma taught by the Buddhas is based completely upon the two truths. And again, the difference between the two truths, a truth of worldly convention, worldly meaning someone who hasn't realized emptiness, whatever they apprehend, that is a conventional truth. And it's a conventional truth because that object is mistaken in some way. Whereas an ultimate truth, this is emptiness, and it is realized by wisdom realizing emptiness. It is an ultimate truth or a supreme truth.
That Donam Demba said, Charak Yomare. Donam Demba said, Charam Yomare. They cook check a written to Oko and the Tonshidi, Donandeba Tonshidi, Charatamara Yungri, Donandeba Mola Charache Mer. Penanjugi, Gansa said, Nazo Gansa said, Gansa Koron, Ganlay, Matuba, Lupa, Shabat, and Rangun, Jubi, Tombi, Tombadi, Gansa. Matuba, Sigura, Gansa Tingi, Tony Legurua. Dinashin, Tanga Pumbo Shadu, Pumbo Koron, Gala Matuba, Lupa, Shabat, and Rangun, Jubi, Tombi, Tombadilla, and the Pumbo Tingi, Tony Legurua. Dinashin and the Jozo Sina, Jozo Koron, Gala Matuba, Rangun, Jubi, 刚来嘛对吧？绿帕下巴真来嘛对让我们这边东北东上的了，就是定的东西些。我都那些都是的，但其实噶西扎马拉用过的边呢，噶啥的碰波当角色的，今天扎马拉用过的地呢，东西确诊扎马拉呢，东亚给噶这来挑外面的话，让我们这边讲的话，噶这让我们这边的话，第个别个噶这东北你的嘞，查拉去的要嘛，到那点把的来查拉去吧，噶要嘛嘞。
Ultimate truth then refers to emptiness. With emptiness, there is no variety or degree of subtlety. There's certainly a variety in terms of the basis of negation or the basis for emptiness to be realized, basis upon which emptiness is realized. There is variety, but not in terms of the emptiness realized, in terms of the emptiness, the ultimate truth. There is no variety in terms of subtlety. For example, the self or the person appears to exist independently. It appears to exist by way of its own essence or characteristics. But when investigated, it's realized it doesn't exist in this way. It's empty of being established by way of its own essence. This too is the case for the aggregates. The body, the minds, they appear to be truly existent, but when investigated, they are found not to exist truly, but to be empty of being established by way of their own essence. Likewise, a table. A table appears to consciousness as being truly existent, as being independent, as existing by way of its own essence, but when investigated, it's found not to exist in the way that it appears. It's found to be empty of being established by way of its own essence. So we see here, in terms of the basis of negation or the basis upon which emptiness is realized, there's variety in the illustrations, person, aggregates, table, but the emptiness that is realized, there is no degree of subtlety. There is no degree of subtlety in terms of the ultimate truth.
다 상기 유기 셈 라신 주표 동표 동이 동방이데 네 최고로와 동이 세우로 동이 대단 나랑서 유기 셈 라신 주표 동표 동방이 되니라 셈게 라신 고 덴바 마주버니 되라 캬바지에 차라 균에메 지비지경 차되어 안가서 셈게 라신 주표 동바 라신 덴바 마주버 대다 상이 셈 라신 덴바 마주버니라 뭐 차라 기바 요마 지비지경
Relate this to something we looked at last weekend, which is that the mind of the Buddha is empty of inherent existence. The Dharmakaya is empty of inherent existence. So too is our mind empty of inherent existence. And that emptiness of the mind of a Buddha and our own mind, between these two, there is no difference in subtlety between the emptiness of the mind of a Buddha and the emptiness of the mind of an ordinary being. There is no difference in terms of subtlety.
다 가르쳐봐 요르스네. 다 동시 취재 셈 상이기 셈게 라신 덴바 마주바데다 마저 셈게 라신 덴바 마주바 니들라 켜봐 매나양. 다 덴바 마주바 동비기 동시 취재 상이 셈데 균 탐지 방차유 균 탐지 세차와지제. 시제 용수소바 켄되게 균 탐지 세바차들. 시제 용수소바 켄바 가르쳐서는 켄 하고야라 바시기 균 찾아 세와인자 가리나 켄투고로와. 가생한도 함마 균 마세바네 디 균디게 가지네 시제 켄투고 말. 상이기 균 탐지 세바 방차와인자 상이 켄바디기 동시 취재 셈디기 최 탐지 켄바 차송을. 당 아주게 셈게 라신 마주바 뎀베 동바디 상이 셈 뎀베 동 지바레데 이나 동시 셈 거랑 안저 셈 데라 뇨모바 당 안에 개와다 미개와다 뇨모바다 데니기 도바다 남도 태좀 다 말할 셈제 다 말할 릭망 뭐 여바자 다 디기 데서 꾼디게 매바 쇠마도 원장 안에 아주게 셈디기 아주 셈기 최 탐제 또 두고 말 가선 마도가도 꾼 망부지게 값이고 값지 꾼디기 겐제 나가 또 마도 디착으로 와 개발하다 동시 취에 셈당 상이에 셈당 안서 셈일 뱀 마세베다 차바 첨부시고 차대로.
On the one hand, in terms of the emptiness of the mind of a Buddha and the emptiness of the mind of any other being, that there is no difference. But of course, Buddha is vastly different from other beings. So the difference again is not the emptiness of their minds, of the minds of a Buddha and a non-Buddha, but rather the degree to which faults have been eliminated. A Buddha is perfectly, completely realized all faults have been completely eradicated, and it's because all faults have been eradicated that a Buddha is omniscient and can observe or perceive all phenomena. Because the faults to perceiving all phenomena have been completely eradicated, the Buddha, through their omniscient consciousness, can perceive all phenomena. As ordinary beings, afflicted minds regularly arise, virtuous minds also arise. We have this dance between afflictions and virtuous minds continuously. But all these minds are pervaded by the error of ignorance, of self-grasping, or ignorance of true grasping. And because of the faults of ignorance as well as our other afflictions, our wisdom, our consciousness rather, is obscured, and therefore our consciousness is not omniscient. These obscurations are what prevent us from observing other phenomena. A Buddha has completely eradicated these faults and therefore has cultivated an omniscient consciousness. So whilst in terms of the emptiness of the mind, there is no difference between ourselves and a Buddha, on this other level, our minds are vastly different.
Dembani nane dondon dembatela ngola chara kebaka meana the kunzup demba said ya da ngola chara mangbu yore kunzup dembatela chara bema se kebar mangbu yede nanglolia kashe chama kashe raba kashe yabo imba kashe gyuen yede da dendige na sosu yede.
Again then, for ultimate truth, for emptiness, there is no variation in terms of subtlety, whereas for conventional truths, there is a wide variation in terms of subtlety.
Shenla kunzu tembaso yorubada kangla matyoba rangongani dubade mebarwa mebaza anda yene yorwa anda ganas yorosin shenchile twene dubri shenchile twene yargi shenchile twene gyuwa dugore chiza shenchile twene yobare ese shenchile twene lwepa dabazmi yobare ese that thing you be do sungore.
Conventional truths do exist. How do they exist? As dependent arisings. Conventional truths exist as dependent arisings in that they arise in dependence on causes and conditions, imputation and so forth, and because they are dependent arisings, they can and do change.
군주 당보 군주 덴바데 하고 그래 군주 덴바라 때네 군주 덴바 또 하고 되네 될라 때네 가서 된다 데바 또 오고 그래 제대 뭐 아 세세 군주 덴바 된다 덴바 또 해게 탑람 가려서 당보 군주 덴바 삼 당고 그래 군주 덴바 삼 당에 되네 될라 때네 군주 된다 데바 또 두고 그래서 제사다 그 탑시데 돈남 데바 또 해게 탑람데 디스 그래 탑시.
To realize the ultimate truth or emptiness, one first needs to come to understand and reflect on conventional truth. It's through first understanding conventional truth that one comes to realize ultimate truth.
제사다 대신 안 저기 샘디 안 저기 샘데라 베네 kunzu tenpa de la da chara mangbo yoba na xin ta nga zo sem de la ya chara nga zo sem la ya chara mangbo yoba ane che sem de la ya do mangbo yoba an di yoba re chi san di su cha san gar san xian chi la due ne zhuba re chi san gang la ma de rang mo ne zhu yo ma re chi re ta do na gar song san gang la ma de ba rang mo ne su ji la ma de ba rang mo ne zhu de ba yin na ane ko yuwa da ka yo ma re ko la pan ne che yo ma ka sa gang la ma de ba ro ba gang la du yo ma yuwa da me ba re 지상 강에 마도바 랑군의 주바디 매바 인장 현실의 뒤에 현실의 뒤고 그래서 현실의 뒤바 인장 현실이 또 비교와 다외도 그 교와 다 두고 그래서 그 교와 다 두고 그래지.
As mentioned, conventional truths have there's a great degree of variety of subtlety, coarseness and subtlety amongst conventional truths, and likewise with our minds. There's a great degree of variety with our minds, both in terms of subtlety as well as minds which are virtuous or wholesome and unwholesome. So here the key point to bear in mind is that because conventional truths are dependent arisings, they can change. Despite all phenomena appearing to us as being independent, they are actually dependent. And this means they can change. If phenomena, such as conventional truths, were independent, if they were independent, it means nothing can influence them, because they're independent of causes. They're independent of imputation by mind. Those causes and imputation by mind couldn't impact an independent phenomenon. But because conventional truths are dependent arisings, they can change. Causes and conditions can influence them.
Tikpa saya dan, kiawa saya dan, nyomo pa saya dan, chakdang saya dan, sem yaga rik dan, duwa mangbo yoye yorwa. Chisan ganis gyuwa tang go rasin, shenchi la tuyne gyuwa tang sido kar gyuwa tang go rasin, nga zoi sem duwa rik di shenchi la samatang che sem duwa rik chasan mewa suyo. Ani sem yaga rik gewe rik de diga, nani sem di ya nipa chera tang, dus gyuwa tang re chirwa, da gyuwa tang go re sedi. Chisan shenchi la tuyne, ani shenchi la tuyne, sem gyuwa tang go re sedi. gyuwa tang hadi nga zui sem nyomo barik mikiwi nyomo barik pa mewa suyo ane shen chikla tene da gewi rik ane penbe rik chiki samlo tiki sangbi rik di ya nipa charshar tang do she jebe na nga zui do nyamlen che yodo gombe chik kasa sem gyuwa tang korase gyuwa tang hadi dus tang ya re che.
This points to our whole process of spiritual development. Because phenomena are dependent arisings, they are dependent on things other than themselves, such as causes and conditions and imputation. So this means both our wholesome minds and our unwholesome minds come about independent on causes. They are not independent, they're not independent, but dependent. They arise in dependence on causes. Therefore, by focusing our attention to habituate ourselves more to a particular way of thinking, we will strengthen our habituation in this regard and weaken our habituation in the opposing regard. So wanting to be happy, we focus our energies on cultivating habituation to virtuous ways of thinking. We strengthen our habituation to virtuous minds, so we're creating ever more causes related to wholesome minds. And in this way, we weaken and eradicate our afflicted minds.
nyama nyamlen ji de nyamnyong wu tho ne an gyuwa ta tha de tin tang gu ba de nga so le lo den dang go ro ba da sang yu sue ji san karen dang go se ne ji san so su gi sem ngam ba di ma me ba sue sang bo de ya ge ta ya la so so ra rang gi gom je sem so so ra rang gi sem le ya gom jap je gom je ya ge ta na ma do so so gi sem sang bo ding ya ge ta ya da ngam ba de ma ge me ba sue la 소소라랑이 진마도 미션다지기 곰진에 안에 상보도 곰진이 셈 남바드 메가스에 투야다 상보야 야 뉴베차다 투야디 깔레하고 차고래 제상 소수기 셈 남바드 메가스에도 소소라랑이 제야다 소수기 셈 야가디 게위지 야 뉴베차다데 소소라랑이 지고 그래서 제상 되는 점 저기 셈 소소라랑이 셈이야 곰제 아니 제바제 삼마당 곰제지 교와 땅고 그래서
Buddha Shakyamuni only became a Buddha because he took responsibility for his own mind. So in previous life, when he was an ordinary being, he focused on cultivating virtuous minds and eradicating non-virtuous minds. And in this way, he was able to create the causes required to spiritually develop and become a Buddha. And so too with ourselves. By habituating ourselves to wholesome ways of thinking, to breaking our habituation to unwholesome ways of thinking, we will spiritually transform ourselves. But the person who can do this is ourselves. We can't hope for someone else to change our own mind. We have to take responsibility for our own mind. Our mind is our own responsibility. Whether and how we deal with what arises in our mind, how we respond to the world and its events, this is our responsibility.
지산 땡진 저와 중에 땡진 저와 중 삼당 고래세 상예 좀내 소양 아주 땡진 저와 중화세데 삼당아 송고래 가르스네 배는 아주기 아주 제부 내지 고구에나 아니 디게 사번디 내기 사번지 답도마도 내게 사번 셴데 답하나 내디게요 말와 지상 사번 되나 디니시 답나 제부 딘지 연구요 바데 하고 진행아주기 아니 사번 대단 디기 제보도 되었게나 대단 디기 사번 답고와 벤 에볼 고구도 총자고 에볼 고구 선배나 에보 이신 답고마도 신 암기 신 답신 에볼 게요 말와 그래서 암 고구 선 암기에게 사번 답고마도 에볼이 기계에게 신답 수샤베나 게요 마디나시 오데 사번 디니시 답나 제보 디니시 용고래 디니시 답나 제보 디니시 용고래 세비게 두스네 규텔한테 제보도 시계요 바데 삼다 세보하거나 아주 제보 딱딱 주투고로 언디나시 당 아주게 셈데래야 안에 셈 교화등 한바식도 교화등 매발고 그래서 배는 규텔라 때네 제보도 용고로 와 디나시 아주 셈 간에 때네 공부 있나 언제 한바도 매발 수기를 남나 배는 아주 컨트롤로다 현재 컨트롤로 지는 뇌에 삼바로 지나 아주게 현재 잠재 공부 있나 잠바다 제와도 공부 있나 디셈바드까지 공부 있나 슈디 슈기 공부 될라 때네 아주 컨트롤다 현재 뇌에 삼바데 마 슈충충 땅거로와 제가 셈디 공부 제가 되네 공묘도가 아주 상부의 셈베 되네게 상부의 잠재 삼로도 슈처셔 땅거로 공묘도 슈처 두고래 낸비 셈 현재 뇌에 삼바다 체외 삼바데 슈충충 땅거로와 제가 디 텐테세 디소로와데 제가 상부의 셈디 상 잠바다 잠재 공부를 때네 내가 차워서는 낸비 셈 현재 뇌에 삼로도 마슈 뇌에 충 줘야다 아니 잠재 삼로도 공부를 때네 그 뉴버처 차야 되지. 지선 땡진 저와 중화세 디니스 두고래세 도 삼당 고래세. 지상 아주 엠비 셈 고야레 셈랑게 셈 곰예 가르 공부지. 잠재 곰 디 공부를 때네 아니 아주 엠비 셈 뉴베 삼바데 말 고도 그래서. 지 땡진 저와 중화래. 진짜 땡진 저와 중화 마이나 강라에 뛰어봐 랑원에 마루 강라에 마뛰어봐 지나 잠재 가지고 곰나 나중에 콘도데 매바 차도에 매 뉴베 삼바 매바 차 그 거기 데메 되셔와 그 뛰어디로 뛰어봐면 사다 뛰어봐는데 뛰는 쭉 뛰어봐인자 되네 검지 아주 도시네 안에 가서 잠재 검지 공부 그래 세도 디 공부할 때네 다 네베 삼바데 시도 그래서 디순고로와 탑람도 디순고로와.
Right from the outset of our training, the Buddha has encouraged us to engage in the reflection on dependent arising. And his teachings, from those which are introductory, right throughout the cycle of teachings, dependent arising is explicitly and implicitly presented. This is crucial. We need to understand that desired results come about in dependence on causes, and moreover, we then need to know what those causes are. For example, if one wants to grow a field of barley, barley seeds have to be created. If this is unknown, any seed is put in the ground, who knows what one will get? Or if a farmer has a field that is suited to the cultivation of apples, but he doesn't plant the seeds for apple trees, but rather for mango trees, he's going to struggle to get any apples. In fact, he may not even get any mangoes. So here, we have to recognize that results come about in dependence on causes, and not just any old cause, but specific causes. So how it relates to ourselves is that we all are troubled by afflictions, anger, attachment, ignorance, pride, and jealousy, and so forth. Recognizing that these trouble us, recognizing we want to be freed of these. A mere aspiration, may I be a good person, a kind person, a wise person, is insufficient. The particular causes need to be cultivated. Recognizing that anger is so harmful to ourselves and others, to the extent we put energy into developing loving kindness within us, becoming a caring and tender person, to the extent we cultivate those causes, in dependence on that, the ripening result of anger is going to come about much less likely, much less often, and be of less strength, because of a predominance of contrary causes, of opposing causes. So if we recognize within ourselves that we easily become enraged, or we want things to go our own way, we insistent on our way being correct, recognizing that, we need to cultivate the opposing causes. And to the extent we cultivate the opposing causes, the unwanted result will come about less frequently and have less strength. I often then relate this as with the visual image of a scale. As one adds weight to one side of virtue, then unwholesome ways of thinking, this will become less frequent. Another way to understand the scale is it's a dependent arising. As we make more causes here, we will get the desired result, and we will not get the undesired result. So therefore, this understanding of dependency we require right at the beginning as well as throughout our training.
She pamper to your digisia, shell, rank, lu launch, Gesoda Chapachana, Shella, Tangi, Samlodi, Gombaina, Samlodi, Temper Matuba and Zang, Kala Mother Rang when you do Maduba and Zang, go Shanchilla Tune, just not dinner Gombaina, Gombala Tune, Samlodi, Nuba Church at Ugore. Some of the Gazin Nuba Church of Bene, Tang Seneg, somebody, Manuba Chung to Gore. Daddy and Dina Shang and the Surim Sung said. Lunga yusum yugone shell nuba chigme sembe samlo tambaina sans combaina di nuba de samlo dia combaina comba dela tene and ko samlo de nuba comba de nuba cherchu korwa de nuba cherdo de dela tene garcha korsa shella nube sambada shella chewe samba chasama nuba chunchu korwa jisen tenjin jewa chwa du sinanga samda ngu dela tene jebu din shungo de 지난 규딘이 사반의 제보된 신고를 선배 삼당에도 내내게 전에 당아 저기 출임 송고를 해야다 진배 냠내 저随便 냠내 제고를 해서 차상 대소 아 저기 샘 삼로티 야게 따야 돼 뉴베처 따야다 샘 엠비리티마 매어서야게 탑람도 송고로 받아
When you think of the qualities we want to cultivate in ourselves, such as a generous outlook, being ethical, being patient, cultivate joyous perseverance so we can strive with great pleasure in our spiritual development, it is because all of these qualities are dependent arisings that we can cultivate them. if they were independent or existent by way of their own nature, we couldn't cultivate them at all. We would have whatever level we have, and it couldn't be developed further. For example, then, when one wants to cultivate a giving attitude of giving, a generous spirit, a wish to be of benefit to others, through engaging in those meditations, one can both not only become more generous, but together with this, the opposing mind of miserliness will weaken. And this is possible because both generosity and miserliness, these two consciousnesses, are empty of inherent existence. They don't exist by way of their own nature. They aren't self-existent, but are dependent arisings. Therefore, through cultivating the appropriate causes, these good qualities arise. Similarly, with ethical restraint, not wanting to harm others, not wanting to add to the burden and pain of others, we then go about cultivating the specific causes to be more ethical. And to the extent we cultivate an ethical outlook, opposing consciousnesses, contrary consciousnesses, such as harmful intent or harsh thoughts about others, this weakens. And therefore, harsh speech, selfish and harmful actions all weaken, become less frequent. So the method for us to cultivate is first to recognize the desired result, who we want to be, what individual qualities we long for. Thereafter, recognizing that we want a particular result, and being a result, it only comes about in dependence on acquiring the specific causes, we need to identify the specific causes to achieve that result. That's the second step. Thirdly, we cultivate knowledge how to train our mind in these causes, how to cultivate these causes within our mind. Third. Fourth and final, we then engage repeatedly over a sustained period in training our mind in the way that we have learnt. This is the method to transform ourselves and become the person we long to be.
제바 규때 되는 체는 되는 용도 아디 친구도 제바 체는 규때래 되는 대보 되는 공부할 되는 두고라서 되는 가서 또 치는 소소 삼다 또 치는 공부하다 셈 되시는 공지 냐는 제바 있나 다 길이시는 소소 셈이야 유와 간지 두고도 미니세 배가 저게 로다 다와다 로다 되는 망고 줘도 갑라 아니 냐마 소소 나라 삼나 나라 가르가르 리고래 다디 갑려야 삼나 나라 가르리도 또 셈지 유와 줘도 민도 또 samtavena yuwa duguyo bade komi ngazogi des nyamnen chebaina no yuwa tenden dugor wada yuwa duguyo bade dini do shene ngazogi ngoso ngazole racheba ligirwa ngoso hakugurwa yuwa duguyo nyamalo lo nyama nga dini ki chögi nangchö lobjong dini sammada samde dini chikugoya dini chigyo miliyana tubse tayada ane kongranglayada milu gyönjö jayada milu yagoda dini ligyo sembe 안 다다디 갑로된 딘지 야고요 말 두섬되게 다 삼로 나려야 잠지게 삼로다 아니 지게 딘지 지게 미에 삼비게 샬레 뇌바지 딩말에 삼베 삼로디 죽체 두고요 바디 나주기 냠용을 토는 누우시네 길리길리시 소수기 냠용 토네 라초용으로 라초반데 데네 지도도 다 데네기 지도 안데 디치네 디용사였을 지비기다 나주기 뇌바 체시 두고요 바디 세바하고도 되는 아주 샘기 라신 코로나 샘기 라신 덴바 마주바디 고곰고요 말 라신 코로 덴바 마주바 네 덴바 마주바 차려로 고 곰네 야게 땅가서 고요 말 땅아주 샘기 균일이디 마세 샤바네 되는 아주게 산요고 바토바야라 안 지게 타냐이 주고요 바디 도스체네 균지게 삼다 된지게 삼다 도스체네다 삼다네 소수기 라렌타지 곰바이나 아주 삼로디 야게 주고요 바디 소소라는 게다 It's
important then to be clear on this process, identifying the desired result, thereafter, identifying the specific causes required, thirdly, understanding how to train one's mind to cultivate those causes, and then fourthly, not leaving this at mere intellectual knowledge, but to train, and not sporadically, but repeatedly over a sustained period. Here, there's a key point. the causes we are trying to develop and the causes we are trying to overcome, this whole process takes time. We have a strong habituation to certain ways of thinking, and to overcome this requires an equally or greater strength of habituation to a new way of thinking. This needs to be recognized, that for so many years and lifetimes, our thoughts have been mistaken, and we are habituated to afflictions. Therefore, merely through hearing inspiring teachings and doing a little bit of meditation is not on its own, is not going to lead to an instant transformation. Transformation of deeply held or habitual ways of thinking to which we have strong familiarity doesn't happen overnight. It's certainly not instantaneous. Therefore, guard against impatience. Nevertheless, through reflecting through gaining ever more knowledge, one's confidence independent arising will grow, and this aids our perseverance. And then, slowly, over time, probably first others will be aware of your change. Maybe you'll also be aware of your change. But this takes time. It doesn't happen in weeks or months. It takes time. Then after one has been receiving teachings and reflecting on them repeatedly over a sustained period, you'll notice within yourself how in the past, some years ago, you used to respond in certain circumstances in a particular unwholesome manner. Now, when encountering the same situation, one doesn't react in the same way. Maybe in a similar manner, but without the same strength. Or maybe not like before at all. And this then gives confidence, and this one needs to remind ourselves of. It adds to our confidence, our strength of mind. If our mind were inherently existent, if it existed by way of its own nature or essence, it could not change. Being independent, causes will have no impact on it. But this is not the case. And because this is not the case, our mind can be radically transformed. Freedom from the afflictions can be achieved. And Buddhahood itself is entirely possible through applying ourselves diligently over time.
가르교에 로교인 최초대 가르 용어세다 가지고 나 생각 덴버 두바지베 덴신디 다 교인 최초들이 다 디기 뭐디 가지고 가르도 코에 유가는 징기도 진바 나신지 유디 누게 민도 세베게 무인에서도 하고 해야 돼 이게 최초대 가지고 디시고래 진짜 동방이 시 조디래 디고네 시고래 진짜 디하고 고래 디 가지고 다들 봐도 디 하모고 왜 견제네 근데 디게 녀모바 망발리고 녀모바 깨다 동 레사야 디디 용고래 진짜 디 한국어로 와서다 진짜 당하는 지금 나세야 나로들이야 간지 진짜 나세 요로바다 요반자 가르스네 电情这个情况吧，要不然是先起来对呢，如果人嘛的先起来嘛，对吧？要买的是呢，上去送茶吧的，当然最多现在心情呢，电这热饭的嘛，这呢，这不看的现在预计了电的主要嘛都预计了嘛，电不用买的吧？其实的先起来对呢用嘛对热饭好过的，电里查什么大的，这个些的家，你要的话先起来对呢要的话，要不然这当下的看的是多。로라 가르스 능도 나와나 신가데 가르스도 세데 제바체야기 레어도 디상아 템버트버지비 덴싱기 모올이야 니 짐바나지 두이 민도 심베게한 돈이 제바체야리야 안 고좀 고로시 된 좀용고로와 고좀 고로 고주고래 고주고로 고좀 세네
Phenomena that exist all dependent arisings, dependent on causes and conditions, imputation by mind, parts and parts. We look then at the I, and the I is important to look at how the self appears to us, because our grasping at the self as existing in the way that it appears, as independent, is the root cause of all our suffering. And therefore there is great benefit to reducing this suffering. There's great benefit from investigating whether the self exists in the way that it appears, and coming to recognize in reality how the self exists. And as we've heard, that the I, or the self, is a dependent arising, particularly it's dependent on mere imputation by mind. The I exists, but only or merely as a dependent arising. That being said, this is not how the self spontaneously or naturally appears to us. The self appears to us as being independent, but the way it actually exists in reality is dependent on imputation by mind. This we need to understand, and to the extent we understand this, we need to make a concerted and consistent start in these reflections.
Today, Zadang Anzuki Kisinyama Shubana Jires, Sedoloria, Chardu Kabla, Gandes Chagdu, Sepicate, Hako, the Bear Kishimo Chakore. Chisalolia, Chartan, Gandes Chagdu, Chidang Anzuki, similarly, Yibi Kabla, and Jesosaranga said some died Tininga, some died Lodelia, I said the Ganes Nangdu, Chishimju Chied, that is Shimju Chia. Do Chishimju Chebana, Gilis and Anzu, and Nade Lodelia, now the said. Korong Galaya Matuba Korong Winnie Korong Ruene Drew Devays Nangore said. Just did now an ashing, Nadi Yore, then I Yore, Nay Kalasa, Nay Chava Chigore, and then Nay Lolaya, Deniki Chingachi Nangudu. Deniki now an ashing, I did that. Kandishuna Kahoina says Shimchebana and the Pumpong eat in a Chebachidu, and Dushin the Chebachidu, Chesa Galaya Deniki Gansam Chiglia. The nigger judge the Nadiguni Don Sachimato, Mania, Nigma, Don Sachimato, Charugure, says that the Nansu di Kalema, the Rangun Juba Nande, Nansu the Dembajuba Nansu di. The now Anashin, Yore Sembe Zimbal Hangit Yoranzo, then I to say how Google Marwa, then Yore Sembe Zimba Jore, did Zimba the Tenzil Hangi, and I Dembajuba Tenzil Hangi Sigore. Says that Danganzo, I do Chineka, now and do him in the Cheva Kansam Chile, now in Mindu, Sempige, sometimes Lord Tachebige, the Ning has already Mindu Sempige, that some of the say which you touch over Leo do, the Jinga, then the Yore, Sempizimba, the Koranshu Garo, Yore, you Mindu Sempe, some of the Shuchimbolena, Yore Sempe, Lord Magaru, Tisan and Gagore, Meva Chegore. Is that the name that the Tombanila, Rashi Mato, Topel, Togure, the Topel, the Gomgure, said the Chegore. Says the Gombaina, and Yore, Rashi to Yore, some of the Garo do, and then Mother Desha Kondo Yomopica Chegomare, Yigmare said, that is in Shabana, Chesa, Tony, Tomba in the Gawa, you said, she had the Tomba in Tobu Lotiki, Comiodu. Dancing Gardure, Denzigana, Yomopagima, Dimagina Kovale, George said the Kissingama Shabana Chibaret.
Can I do something there? The dark temperature, now here, there, 10 over there.
The temperature night, the Teniki made that other.
The dark temperature,
the Dikishime, Tenekishme, the Nansuganes, Nangore, the Jebachidu and Jebachida, and the Gazidogres and the Gayanam, Don Sanju Dogres, and Don Yishigure.
Of great importance to recognize how the self appears to us. This we spoke about some detail in the previous weekend, but I'll recap it here in brief, so as to again create further causes, so as to aid your meditation and your cultivation of this crucial meditation. The first key point is to gain a sense for how the self appears to us. And this is something that can be done at all times, because if you turn your mind inward and ask, what am I doing? I am listening. How does the I appear? Later, I am walking. to have lunch. I am eating lunch. There is always a sense of self. Try to gain a feel for how it appears. An independence in relation to this understanding of how the self appears as being independent. Investigate. Try and find it. You can do this again at any time, not just in formal meditation. Right now, when moving about, when having a meal. Who is eating? Where is this independent self? This independent self that is unchanging and not influenced by anything at all. And yet one keeps looking and realizes ever more frequently that no such self exists. No independent or inherently existent self exists at all. And this consciousness that believes or grasps at the self as existing in the way that it appears is an ignorance. It's not in accordance with reality. Realizing this, our grasping at the self weakens. And to the extent that we weaken our grasping at the self, as mentioned last week, the resulting improper mental engagement and afflicted minds, they too weaken. Our anger, our attachment weaken. And as we continue with this, gaining ever more familiarity, freedom comes closer. Actual freedom, freedom from being bound by the afflictions, liberation comes closer.
Adina sing an juge kansa la samda di je la an juge phungbo da sem se de kanistu su ngan su phungbo se de da nga juge phungbo se de su nga nge da nga la de nge su phung se che gro se sa nge su phung se de nga sam na la da de ka la da nge su phung se de lo le char du ka da ka de char du de sim ju che je na wa na sin na de ka le ji ba de de ji phungbo de nga lo na de kan la ya ma rang wen de ju ba nen go re di nāngā nāshī di ngā tsu phūmbō duyo midu jeba che du dā ngā tsu phūmbō di kāna jīgō re sine dā jīgī yānglā tsōpa dā di nīgi ndūshin yewa shin jīgō re shīgō re di dā ngā rā jīgī tsō ngā rā jīgī kāri pē rō jī kāri che gō re sine nyamā yinā shīngdā kholo li pē che gō rō shīngdā sine dā yānsā ngā tsu mōchā li pā che pē che shina gō dūm di shīngdā di shirā tōngā mē rō di dā mōchā li pē che bā ngā tsu mōchā se chi ngā tsu phūmbō li di jīg bā re dā mōchā se di ngā tsu pē li mā sō na mōchā se di kāni shi tū ko chala roji tunken roji mangboji zomje je kholo da ji mangboji choje zomje chasang chodewe kablang azu dele moja sede lüpa mingi taba mado moja sede dangbone yana da jigi chashe gaya masobaji dangbone sujigi masogala di moja res dubde ji yorbesne zaogine merwada 제가서는 안 잘아지 초전녀 파전녀 추이 파지 안 될이야 홀로지 가르데네 도신 진진데 안 되니게 세세베질라 되니게질라 류파 모자 세팔라 민스타바로 제가 모자 세디 강라야 모두바 랑은 원에 당보인데 수지 차시에다 누마 모두바체 되먹어가지고 그런 원에 두데 모자 쉬어버슨 자오이네 요마 딩아서 세부하고 야로와다 그래서 모자 세디 잘아 초지는 예 수준이 차상 디시 세고샤로 차상 쇠 세위지로 걸 모자라고 마도 쇠마서는 모자라고 말와 진짜 이제 모자 세디 양아 차상 초비 초잠직라 먼저 모자 팔로에 따발마도 진짜 초잠에 된 주바래 모자 세디 진짜 양아 디게 파 차시 직직 파 세베이나 디콜로당 디파파 예와 체베네 모자 세디 얘기네요 말이지
Especially when starting out, in the same period of reflection, reflect on other objects too, not just the self. And because the reflection tends to be quite brief, reflect on other objects. For example, after reflecting on the person, reflect on the aggregates. Taking then the physical aggregate, the body, how does it appear? And all phenomena appear to the mind in the same way as truly existent, would express it differently as being independent and unchanging. Whereas the body is hardly independent. It is dependent on parts. It's a collection of these parts, but not only dependent on a collection of parts, but also causes and imputation by mind. The text, here you can use the illustration that's given in the text of the usually translated as a cart, But rather than using a cart or a chariot, I assume we don't see that many carts around here, but we see many cars, so we're familiar with a car. A car, like the body, like the person, appears to mind as existing by way of its own essence. So where is this essence that makes a car? Or to translate it differently, where is the carness to be found within the car? Clearly, a car requires many parts to be gathered. And not only do these parts need to be gathered, but it being a car needs to be imputed by mind onto that collection of parts. No carness or essence of a car or entity of a car can be found in any single part, because that then is called something else. Nor can it be found in the collection of the parts, because the collection of parts can also change with it still being a car. With more parts added or removed, it can still be called a car and function as a car. And moreover, if something were independent, in other words, truly existent, not impacted by causes, then the dependency of the creating of causes that leads to a creation of a car wouldn't be required for there to be a car. Cars would always have existed and always will exist. And of course that wasn't the case. The initial car, as well as each individual car subsequently, came about in dependence on causes. So clearly, a car requires dependency on causes, on parts, and imputation by mind. Without these dependencies, there's no car. So therefore, a car exists merely as an imputation by mind, as dependent on causes, dependent on parts, doesn't exist by way of its own essence, independent of everything else, or existent by way of its own nature, or self-existence. And in this way, we realize a car is empty of existing the way it appears to mind, empty of being truly existent.
Dene zadang anzugi moda de chashe chasang zomje chobachi le dyeje dela ane chobachi ma chojne delia mingdi garset mingsta jarwa mingmata wena garchayo marwa chasa ko lyepa daba zamgi yede chagore andi na신 안주 풍부되어 와다 풍부해야지 당아주 나주 나야를 가르는 거라서는 강라에 마도 랑원이 줍도 여버진 러는 거래데 당아주 심주기 제반에 아주 풍부해야지 디난바 차시에 망고 초대 샤다 바바다 루고다 데네기 지기 짜다 데네 망고 초등인지 초발에 데네 풍부해야돼요 마도 데네기 야나 마상반에 풍부해야 메로 풍부해 안디양 안에 가르세네 다 디야 당보네 데네기 초고래서 디야 말에 안 당보 데네기 루고다 데네 요 말봐 아메기 조고나는 파 지게 당보 공할 주디가 러부치 마도요 말 디드마 쳇쳇쳇도 전에는 쳇쳇데네 루고와 차 데네 소보자라 차다 데네 차차야 데네 도신 롱차 데네기도 전 줍디어데 당아서 세부를 책으로 와 제가 안주 풍부 주야디 규게 망보질을 때네 연구 여바된 가서 하고야디 아주 두스네 물러라 나와나지 풍부에 강라에 마도 봐 강라에 뭐 그런 거는 줍디어 여바디 때문에 데네 멤버들 세부를 책으로 와 가서 풍부디 규단 게 망보질을 때네 초는 연구 여바 데 초바지네 데네 초한테 샤다 바바도 루고다 차다 소소 두진의 레디 연구 여바 등아주 데네게 세부하고 두진의 심주 제바나 세상 아주 로라 나와나시 풍부디 아주 풍부에 강라에 랑공은 줍디바 나와나신지 유민도 제가 매완자다 된 나와의 요래 선배 삼로디 노르레샤 로로시 레샤 선배게 삼로디 하고 두고로다
With the illustration of a car, all these parts are required to come together for there to be a car, but moreover, mind needs to impute car onto that collection of parts. If this is not done, it cannot be called a car. Mind needs to impute onto the collection of parts for the car to exist. So therefore, a car is merely imputed by mind. Car is merely imputed by mind. Then returning to the initial reflection or the preceding reflection, that of the body, the physical aggregate. Clearly the body has many parts. We have the outer parts like the skin and many parts beneath this. So the body is clearly made up of many parts. So it cannot be said to be independent because it is dependent on parts. And not only is it dependent on these parts, but these parts change continuously, not only on the cellular level changing moment by moment, but if you think of what was our body in the womb, vastly different from now. In fact, there was a time when we didn't even have bones. So the body not only is dependent on parts, but those parts change continuously. Moreover, the change of those parts comes about in dependence on causes. So the body is dependent on causes, it's dependent on parts, and it's dependent on imputation by mind. This is completely contrary to how the body appears to us. It appears to us as being existent by way of its own essence, having something about it that makes it our body. Recognizing that it is not independent but rather dependent, and that the consciousness that grasps that it or believes that it to exist independently is a wrong consciousness, is an ignorance, is what one comes to through this reflection.
Dine zadang juge ndu chine cheba ina nga juge nga sede nga rashin kan sheba di seba gu tu res jeza nga gi rashin di ta kan lai ma de rang wen de tuba me ba de ha go ya dan phung bo sede kan lai ma de rang wen de tuba me ba shi kan lai ma de ba rang wen de tuba min du ta de me na na kan lai ma de rang wen de tuba me na da kan shi tu la ne ka pa nga de phung bo sede 샤다 바바들고 차상 튕기 망보 차시 망보 초바지래 되네 풍보스 팔뢰 다바자미도 오세지 제자다 나세디야 가니스둘라데 나주고 풍보텔라 아니 파 풍봉가 보 강루시 팔뢰 파다바자미 요바레스 제자다 최 가니시네 팔뢰 다신 집에서나 랑원에 마주바 동방이 땜밤 되나데바데시 마다 마집에서나 샹라 되네 팔뢰 다바자미 여바레스 대군도 템바레스 딩이딩 안 저기 내수데 세부 하고 해야 돼 고고 해야 돼 계신 버려서 디스고다.
Through these reflections, one recognizes, firstly, how each and every phenomenon, whether the self, a car, or the body, appears to us as being independent, as existing by way of its own essence. But when we investigate, we realize that they are not independent, but rather dependent on causes, on parts, and imputation by mind. Just like the body, we impute body onto this collection of parts. So too with the I, or the sense of self, we impute I onto any of the aggregates. This meditation is of supreme, of unparalleled importance.
제가 되네 자당 저기 도시네 제바지 심주시데 아니 도 제바치도 셰바딜에 삽삽삽 차차르고 다당 아주 제바 마지 백업랑 아주 셰바디게 락바디게 베지당이 맞아 셰바 참바디게 베지당 거 망체 아주 가르쳐당 아주 기지도 왕시디게 베지당 거로와 왕비 미게 파 토야 아니 암초요 거야 안지기순레 자자 녀야데 왕시디게 흉침부 베지당 왕시 슈지 베지당 왕시 디기 장베게데 이기 셰바 락바디게 베지당 아주 망체 디비티스 베지당 거래 왕시게 장베게 미게 직속 통에도 안셈날에 디두스 이기 셰바 기거로와 제서 셰바 락바차 거래 자 암쪽에 자지 고연도가 자 님보다 미니버스도 낸디 자디기 제소 나위 셰바디 제소 자네 오다디고데 야고데 야고문데 디그치 사데 안두신 리거라 디나신 데도 왕보 셰바 나디 왕비 셰바 나디지 락바량 줄래 셰바 락바로 차겨 나주 망치 비지비지다 거 제가 왕비 셰바 나보 델라 디기 제소 자베게다 아니 이 셰바 락바디 비지단 거 나주 망치 비지 두치 다나 두치 제바 제데 samna jeba chidikala tu chine ane ko yigi shebigi to wangshe digi bene suk digi kanis tu sen shimju chene nga se de kanis lola kanis chagidu nga de kanis tu sibiga shimju chidikabla wangshe bejidan go marwa wangbi sheba bejidan go chesa yigi sheba to chawa de bejidan go tu ma shimju chigi yigi sheba de la cha dugo re chesa sheba chawa digi bejidan dugo re chesa dine za dine ki sheba chamo digi ge da dine ngui ni sui ha go a dang zu beji dang tu de nga zu samlo de yargi chara dugo re dine za ko tarba da tamje kimbe to ko wa to ya ya ne ta nyang ya dugo re se sung go wa da chesa dine za ga de ne dian jin zhe chung za xian ji la nga zu dian gom jeba ina nga zu samlo de yargi dang tu go yargi dugo re 제바 지요 곰발에 때네 만주 녀모 베릭티 매바 수투고 그래서 저 지순 거 당아주 탈바 동안 세고 인자 곰잡 제니 제바지 곰잡아 있나 땡진 저와 될 때네가 녀모 버세 투고래 탈바 거기를 저 투고래 제가 탈바 투고래 해야지 송에 저 지순 거 와다
When one starts out engaging in this meditation, the reflection will be done on a course level. And this is fine, this is correct. And as one continues repeatedly over a sustained period, one will come to one's realizations or understanding much more quickly, and thereby will be able to naturally, or thereby the meditation will naturally progress to subtler and subtler levels. Not only is when we start, is the realization or the understanding at a coarser level, so too is the consciousnesses involved. For example, amongst our coarser consciousnesses will be our sense consciousnesses. Usually then when starting out in this meditation, we'll utilize objects that we perceive through our senses, so things that we see or hear, and we'll notice that independent on what we see or hear or taste or touch or smell, then mental consciousnesses arise and we investigate how do these objects that we have seen or heard, how does speech appear to us? Do they exist in this way or not? And in this way, we're starting at a coarser level of consciousness, but then we will also, as I often present, go to subtler levels, such as investigating how the I or the self appears. The I doesn't appear to our sense consciousness, but to our mental consciousness. So here then this is a slightly subtler level, because the mental consciousness tends to be subtler than the sense consciousness. But as we continue to engage in this meditation, starting out at a coarse or a rough level, how does the I appear? Does it exist in the way that it appears? As we gain familiarity and experience with this meditation, we will naturally be able to progress to subtler levels of investigation. As we become ever more clear that the coarser level that we've been investigating at, the body or the self doesn't exist in this way, naturally we'll start to find new avenues to investigate, new ways that we're perceiving the self to exist independently and investigate to see if it does or does not. And in this way, we take our meditation to subtler levels, to deeper levels. This then has several results. Firstly, the impact on our self-grasping becomes more profound. Secondly, our confidence in our skill as a meditator grows, and we become ever more confident that liberation from suffering, freedom from samsara, enlightenment itself will be attained. So therefore, independence on meditation, our way of thinking improves, our wholesome minds become more dominant, our ignorance and other afflictions become weaker. And as our wisdom increases, our confidence in the attainment of freedom being possible grows ever stronger.
Adin ma di lo shan ru din ma jigba de da panan da wa dra ba ge uma chu ba na le ya panan da wa dra bi ge chu ba le se ngui gu yang da jun ba thong wa yi Wenye Ngo Nine Zimbergur, Yada Tonyo Ganyi Gang de Dingi de Tonga Zumba, Kunzo Temper Songs.
Present what I've just presented, I presented so as to give you confidence to engage in these meditations repeatedly over a sustained period. Now, returning to the text, there's a quotation from Chandakirti. All things can be seen correctly or falsely. Thus, things apprehended have two entities. Objects correctly seen are emptiness. Those falsely seen are conventional truths, the Buddha taught.
Za donda karson de dempani de sungor jibar de yin sheba ngoi gun yang da zumbo tong yi ngoi gun yang da se ngoi bo gun se che ngoi bo gun se de da den che kan de xin da se che kan de chi ne a yang ngo rang gi ngo dembo zhe be dong ba de yang da ba ngo yang da ba ji da an yang ngo xian qi le dui ne zhun de zumba qi ni yong go le xie zhe ngo ge yang da tong a ngo ge yang da se de我点把这边东一的些，今天准备是的，他电前这话就现在电的这个工作别去，其实今天咱去看这起里呢，反正我点把这边东一去的，短点把去的，那工作点把是你用过的也是的送过的。
All things can be seen correctly or falsely. All things we can understand as all phenomena, and they can be seen or perceived or realized in two differing ways. They can be realized correctly or falsely. When realized correctly, one realizes that they are empty of being established by way of their own essence. So this is where realizing correctly or seeing correctly means seeing the ultimate truth. Then falsely, all things can be seen falsely or realized falsely. This refers to that how we conceive conventional truths or conventional phenomena, which is as being independent, as being existent by way of their own essence. That is a false way of realizing phenomena or seeing phenomena.
나와 나신 누에 두면도 제바 제바이나 모아 한신 주변 동변 동상시 통고래서 이 양다 바제 나 안에 되니게 다시 맞진 마다 마지베스나 가지고 탄이베 세미게 두제도 안데디 유에바디 그데 상보다 안바다 유다 젠다 제보 된지 통고래서 니에세데 통화 또 봐서 통화 이 예스 지금 되네 여반자 되네 오니여래 시장我接把起来让心这个东上的我的那让心点不蹲那点把晒的那马大马这边车就与多别个与这个车上那工作点把的是我你呢真把就说的的那个我你多别个路你我你都过来起来马大马这边车呢안에 그 마다 마집에 탄입에 세미게 제바 제여도 유들라 디 상보레 디 안바레 디 안직 첨보레 디 충주레 디 규레 디 제보레 사다 안데니게 또베게 또어도 데니게 또의 유체상 군주된 바레시 예시오레
All things can be seen correctly or falsely. Thus, things apprehended have two entities. In the first line, we had the word see, which is literal, but see can be translated in many ways as perceive or as to realize. In the second line, we have the word apprehend, which Genla says here we can understand as realized. So therefore, in the second line, thus things apprehended or things realized have two entities. So every phenomenon has two entities. When one investigates whether the phenomenon exists in the way that it appears, one comes to realize that it is empty of existing in the way that it appears. It is not independent, but rather dependent arising, dependent on parts, causes, imputation by mind. And this, as in the first line, is to be realized correctly or seen correctly. One comes to realize the ultimate truth. The second entity that phenomena have is that of the conventional. And here, when one realizes or apprehends a phenomena with a conventional consciousness, so not a consciousness realizing emptiness, just the ordinary worldly way of thinking, one realizes that it is a conventional truth. So, for example, when thinking about that I desire this result, and to achieve this result, it comes about in dependence on these causes. These are phenomena that are conventional truths, because an ultimate truth is only emptiness. So causes, results, these are conventional truths, and are realized by a consciousness that is investigating the conventional.
Na donda la chik tangbo ni digi donda karasungora sene ngoy kun se chik tangbo ni digi donda la karasungora sene ngobo kande chi ne ko ngo le jeba chi du kabla ane karasungora sene ngo di na wa na shin kala ma to rang ngo ne tubi tong sa chi do gre tong gu ni go re do gre che da dine 마다 마지베 체나 ane tanyi be chemegi ane gyudang jebu an chebo da chungchung sangbo da ngamba denegi nasobi cheshi dogo re tonggo re chere da donda dingi de sunggo re dangbo dingi de sunggo re mada dakshin jibe chena rangon de dongsa ji dogo re mada ma jibe chena tanyi be chemegi ane jawa sangbo da ngamba jowa da jewi jeba da denegi nasoba tonggo re chere jawa sangbo da jawa ngamba dimi yak보다 그 변에 상보지 약보래 딩간바래 디첨보래 충충래 디규래 디대보래스네 데니기 통고래 지상 마다선 집에 전화 랑고 덴버트베 동화도 거래스 마다 마집에 타니베 우리가 가서 데니기 현실에 뛰는 줍되게 자와 나서 주요바 통고래스 don다 당본이 되지 당본이 don다 되래.
Meaning of these two lines again then in brief is that when all phenomena have two essences, have two entities. When one investigates the essence of, or the entity of a phenomenon, and one realizes it doesn't exist in the way that it appears, one has correctly seen that phenomena, one has realized the ultimate truth. When one doesn't investigate the essence or the nature of a phenomenon, one is realizing the conventional nature of the phenomenon or interacting with a conventional consciousness. And this is because one is not investigating the ultimate way the phenomenon abides. So here, again, to give more illustrations, when one is thinking such a particular form of behavior is wholesome, the opposing form of behavior is unwholesome. A certain way of thinking is virtuous, another way of thinking is non-virtuous. These are all conventional objects, conventional truths. Or if one thinks, oh, this is big, this is small, this is good, this is bad, this is a cause, this is effect, this isn't the ultimate truth. It's the conventional truth. The ultimate truth is only emptiness.
다치가 니번이 되게 가르송으로서는 양다 통유 강대 딩이데 통화 좀봐 군수 덴바 송세디 양다 통유서 양다 세대신일 세대를 짓고 최탐지가 랑신오 간트치네 제바치네 donam 주식 채마시고래 양다 통율 지상 양다 통율 양다 세디 최규모 최군지 그 랑신 간듯이 제바체네 donam 별로들라 donam도 별로들라 양다 봐세요 니기 가르통고로서네 최간듯이 제바체네 강점질 가르통고서 랑원의 주변 동상시 통고 동바이 통고로 데니게 동상 대신에 동상디 델레 민갈로서네 donam den balagres dingi des donam den badel 대신 야다 통일세대 딩이마 시고 말와 제가 양다 통율을 강의데 양다 통율스의 양다 세디 최유모 라 간디 주둠데 제바체네 다 donam도베 참마세오를 donam도베 참마 동방이도베 양다 세디 이 양다 세디 동방이도베 시랍 제가 양다 바 제바체네 랑용 라신이 마주바 도베고 로디기 유 yu sede yu ganyi batela mingala sun donda de balagire esere donda de balagire es yanda ton yu ganyi yanda ton yu gangde de ni de sede de ni la de tongba ni la gro c'est donda de bala c'est donda la yu ngo ganji du cheba cheba chine ganzam je ganya gangla ma de rangon de du tombe tongsan si tonggo de ni yu tongsan di de la désigni donda de bala gore esere.
Looking at the next two lines, objects correctly seen are emptiness, those falsely seen are conventional truths, the Buddha taught. In the third line here, the objects correctly seen are emptiness. Here we have the same word correctly as in the beginning, and the meaning is the same. When an object is correctly seen or correctly realized, means that when it's realized that it doesn't exist in the way that it appears, that it's empty of existing by way of its own essence, one realizes, in the Tibetan is literally thatness, which means emptiness, or it means ultimate truth. So when objects are correctly seen, their emptiness, their ultimate truth is realized.
타마딜로 통화 좀 군주 템버 송세 donda 디신열 셰리 항저 군추 간디시네 마다 마치베 체 타니베 체메기 유강도 통세 유 통세 유도 와서 또에 유 강인바데 아니 그 되죠 아니 민데서 되서라 갈라 그래서 줌바 군주 템바레스 그 줌바 나네 미팀 줌바레 제가 델밍 갈라 군주 템바라 그래 제네.
In the third line, emptiness is realized by a valid cognizer, wisdom realizing emptiness. The fourth line, those falsely seen are conventional truths. Meaning again is the same as before. When an object is not investigated, then one realizes or what one realizes or sees are conventional truths. The object is not investigated, therefore its actual nature of emptiness is not realized, but the object still is still realized, and here the object that's realized is a conventional truth.
donda ningbo disinye sheba jibare anzo demba ni la yangda tin sanje nam yu chue demba ni la yangda tin jidin gunzo demba da dembe dun demba wo sia di da da de ngo go yangda zumba tu ngo ngo ne zumba yangda ton yu gan di tongwa zumba gunzo demba song sia de dinyi donda jibare inza donda khala go sene chue gan de chi ne di tin do ngo an donda be ngo chi da gunzo bi ngo ni yo re 제가 대반이 열셔 가르치네 대반이 열에 군주 병원 donda 병원이 열에서 donda 병원에서 donda 바세 간르시레스 쉬 간르시는 될야 나와들 두에민도 제바 체는 딱선 제베 체나 강래 뭐도 랑문을 주비 동비 동상하지 연구래서 어디 니 donda 바레스 나 마다 마제베 체나 쉬 간르시 제바 체도 되니 상화다 야바다 지기 규다见다 대보다 샬레 되바다 마되바 되니기 되메 세드 되니기 나서 신고래 지쳐서 군주 대바에서 월 제가 강래 마되바 타니비 체메기 유통요도 갈라 리교다 대보 첨보다 충중 파쇼다 추쇼 되니 안데 조아다 원와세 자와지 되니기 최나서 봐 신고래서 타니비 체메 유도 규비게 최 간지는 대수 차상 군주 대바라기래서 타니베 체마 동유마도베 체메 유도야 야망고여로 와든데 디 첨보레자 충주레자 디 자와지기도 고 조구도 고 내가 레드레자 저로 와다 규다 대보서 되게 자와 나서봐줘 신라 뛰네 땡진 저와죠 줍되게 나서봐줘래 디차상 군조된 발라기래스 제가다 don다라 동유도베 동유모숨도베 셔레 유두기비 유강인 바데 멘델라 don한데 발라기래스 동유도베 타니주베 체미기 유두기베 유디 강인 바델 군조된 발라기래스 제가 다 델레 유간데 최간데 신나 디테도 군조된 바다 don도 원이 요래서 don다라 디레다.
These two verses that His Holiness has quoted, one by Nagarjuna, one by Chandakirti, express the same meaning. So to read them together again, Dharma taught by the Buddhas is based completely upon the two truths, a truth of worldly convention and an ultimate truth. All things can be seen correctly or falsely, thus things apprehended have two entities, Objects correctly seen are emptiness. Those falsely seen are conventional truths, the Buddha taught. All phenomena, when they are investigated to see if they exist in the way that they appear, one comes to realize that they do not exist in this way. They are not independent, but rather dependent arisings. And one realizes emptiness, that they are empty of existing by way of their own nature. And this is the realization of the ultimate truth, and it's realized by a valid cognizer realizing emptiness. So this is one of the two essences that all phenomena possess, the ultimate. They also possess a second essence, that of the conventional, second entity, that of the conventional. So this is all phenomena that are realized by a valid cognizer or by a consciousness other than emptiness. Cause and effects, up and down, various phenomena, a table and so forth. These are all conventional truths that are realized by a valid cognizer that is not realizing emptiness.
나저 돈다닝보디 다니 가사레 다디레 셰디 가르쳐서는 나주 최근대지기네 뭐 라신 주비 동바 동이 지다 안에 셴라 되네 주비게 안에 가서 마다마지 뭐 군주대 봤어야돼 뭐니 용거래 세상 안주디 다신 뭐니 순이디 아주 하고 가야 돼 계침부레스 세상 디 하고 요도 하고 발을 때 거네 당아 주게 다 땡진 저 중앙상 아주 삼로디 아주 내가 지금 아주 셈기 때문에 뭐라시 마주바다 셈 걸어 구조 때문에 요 땡진 저와 저 군주 전이 요바자 아주 셈디 공발할 때네 디 공발할 때만은 아니 이제 람 공발할 때네 아주 녀모바디 세야다 아주 삼로디 이야기 공패 땅토야다 세상 아주 소수기 지게 냠내지 공바이나 탈바 탐지기 보고 뭐 토투구리어스 지난 교연군세 교연 차상 세 투구를 코발에 탈 투구리스 지난다 라니 되니 투구여 봐자 현sem자하자 라산 차다 찍바 인자 라니게 되니 냠내지 샬라야 탑람디 tuyен제 현sem자 탐지 동안도 줘야다 탑라다 아니 되게 야 탈바 탐지기 보고 봐래 고야기 다 소소 도스네 아주 냠내지 고래서 되는 닝보디 디순고로 와다.
To summarize what we've looked at here then, is that all phenomena have these two entities, an ultimate and a conventional. When one investigates how a phenomenon appears and whether it exists in the way that it appears, and comes to realize that it's empty of being established by way of its own essence, one realizes the ultimate truth. And this is so important to know, for the reasons I mentioned at the beginning of our class today. It is to the extent that we realize ultimate truth, in particular in relation to the self, that we weaken and eventually will eradicate the afflictions. And how does one come to realize the ultimate truth? Well, this realization itself is a dependent arising. It comes about in dependence on the accumulation of causes and conditions. And this method, this technique was mentioned earlier. Knowledge needs to be cultivated. That knowledge needs to be integrated, and it needs to be integrated repeatedly over a sustained period. And in this way, to the extent that we apply ourselves to all of these stages, we will cultivate a mental path that is more in accordance with reality than how we ordinarily think. And in this way, we will both strengthen our wholesome minds and weaken our unwholesome minds, and progress towards attaining liberation and enlightenment itself.
We'll
conclude here then for this morning. If you have some questions, then please feel free to ask now. Then enjoy your lunch.